Okay, couple more minutes and we'll be started here. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us here at the Harbor Springs Area Historical Society. We are excited to have our programs coordinator, Beth Wemigwase, join us this afternoon with her premier history talk celebrating Black History Month. Couple more minutes. I have a couple people still entering. And it is 2:00 and I'm going to just get started just again by saying welcome. We have been open here at the Harbor Springs Area Historical Society on Main Street in Harbor Springs. Year-round. We are still open by appointment, and so we do encourage you to bring family and friends. Give us a call. We would love to give you a private tour of our museum exhibits. And in the meantime, we have pivoted, like most other organizations, to create a calendar of history talks. We do have 2 more scheduled in March to include the history of Harbor Springs, and another one March 11th, which will talk about the historic gardens of Michilimackinac. So we encourage you to go to our historical website, harborspringshistory.org, to register for both of those as well. And we get 2 more people. I'll get seated here. I'd like to give a shout out of thanks to Mary Catherine Hanna, who is the executive director at Perry Farm Village and Hillside, who has inspired us to create this history talk. We have tried to do some programming with our area senior centers through the summer months and just kind of kept getting cancellations. So thank you, Mary Catherine. I believe you're on our viewing here, and we welcome you all, and we look forward to doing many more of these. Beth will start with a presentation. It'll be about 20-30 minutes long, and we will have some Q&A. You'll notice down at the bottom of your screen, there's a chat button, and we encourage you to use that and send us any questions you have, and we'll do our best to answer those throughout or at the end of the presentation. And without further ado, Beth Wemigwase. Beth, welcome. Thank you for all your hard work and all the time that you have put into this and further researching this topic, which is of interest to many people. So Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Kristen. And it is great to see everybody. I'm so happy to be here with you today, talking about these 2 establishments in honor of Black History Month.
And you know, I heard a quote that I really enjoy that said, Black history is American history. And like all history, it's defined not only by its traumas, but by its triumphs. And today we're going to be highlighting 2 sort of triumphs that are in our area that have to do with Black history. So let me go ahead and set the scene. So where we're starting, the first resort that we're going to be talking about is called Idlewild. And in order to understand how unique it was, I wanted to take you back to that time period. So we are going back to the Red Summer of 1919. And the Red Summer is a term used by historians to basically name a period where almost 36 riots and white supremacist terrorist attacks occurred across the United States. This was an enormous period of tension. You can see the map here where all of those race riots and lynchings took place. This is just after the close of World War I. There was an economic slump at the time. All of these veterans were returning home and finding that their jobs were no longer there, and tensions just boiled over into these very extreme confrontations in 1919. So that's where our setting begins, really a time of Jim Crow segregation and racism and difficulty. And out of that comes Idlewild. You might be asking, what is Idlewild? It was a resort community that was established specifically for African Americans. As you might imagine, at this time, which goes from about 1912 to 1964, Idlewild was an absolute rarity. There were no other places like it in the country, and especially not in Michigan. Idlewild itself, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but I've got a map up there on the screen. It was located right near Baldwin, Michigan, to the east of Ludington, and then south of Traverse City. So it was located about right there. And what was really unique about Idlewild is that it was founded by 4 white couples who have wonderful names. So I'm going to read you their names. The couples in 1912 who founded the Idlewild Resort Company were Erastus and Flora Branch, Alberta and Isabel Branch, Wilbur and Mammy Lemon, and A.E. and Mondolin Wright. And basically, these 4 couples realized that there was a growing middle class African American component to the country. And just like everyone else trapped in these big cities, they wanted to escape. They wanted to go on vacation, go swimming, hiking, enjoy the North Country. And they couldn't. There was no place that welcomed African Americans at that point. During, for example, an extreme example, during the Red Summer of 1919 in Chicago, there was a Black youth swam into the wrong part of the beach and was stoned and drowned by the white beachgoers there. So this was an extremely brave thing that these couples did in founding this resort, and it was also probably motivated by the thought that they could turn a profit as well. There was a market for this. So they founded the Idlewild Resort Company. They advertised in all of the major African American newspapers across the country, and the first thing they advertised were simply excursions. Come up to Idlewild, come up to this beautiful lake, and enjoy camping, hunting, fishing, horseback riding. Come for a couple of weeks, and if you like it enough, buy a lot. They were advertising that you could buy a lot for $1 down and $1 a month. And this idea, not just of being able to escape to a place that was safe and welcoming and had these activities and a chance for recreation, but a chance to own a home or a plot was really, really motivating for a lot of African Americans at the time. And I love this ad to the right here that talks about, here at last is the opportunity you have long waited for. For many years, the colored people have longed for the opportunity to own their own summer resort. And it was just a bold idea at the time. The idea really took off in about 1915, and that is when Dr. Daniel Hale Williams purchased land there. Dr. Williams was actually the first surgeon to perform open heart surgery in the country, and that was in 1893. And he and a lot of his professional colleagues and associates from Chicago went on one of those early excursions to Idlewild and decided to purchase property. Dr. Williams, or Dr. Dan, as he came to be known, actually bought 27 acres of land and then started creating a subdivision of his own and selling plots. He called his subdivision the Oakmere, and there's a picture of it right here on the screen, the Oakmere Hotel. He had a hotel on the site, and then he also sold different lots of property to his colleagues, and those included such notable people as NAACP co-founder Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois and cosmetics giant Madam C.J. Walker. So these were extremely intellectual businessmen, women, professionals, just sort of rushing at this chance, following in Dr. Hale's footsteps. This is a map of what Idlewild looks like today, so you can get an idea of the setting. This is the main lake, Idlewild Lake, and this right here, Island Park, is where most of the activities began to take place. So Island Park was the center of activity from about 1920 to 1945. The Idlewild Clubhouse was there. That's where Oakmere was, the hotel and the subdivision. It was later home to the Purple Palace Summer Club. And there were a bunch of different little covered walkways that would get you across from one part of the lake to the other, just across to that little island. And then all along the rest of the lake, there was beaches and boating, and all in this area were plots of land that people could purchase. Now, the peak of Idlewild was around the 1950s and 60s. At that time, as many as 25,000 vacationers came to that area in the summer. And that huge explosion of population fueled almost 300 African-American owned businesses. There were hundreds of cottages for rent, lots of year-round residents as well to support that industry. They got a post office, a fire department, a roller rink, like I mentioned, the clubhouse. And so it really became, it was called the Black Eden of Northern Michigan. And as you can see from these pictures, was a place where African-American families could be themselves, where their kids could run around on the beach and they didn't have to worry. And it was the only place of its kind. I did want to highlight quickly at this time the Negro Motorist's Green Book. I'm sure some of you have heard of the Green Book. It was made into a recent Oscar-winning film. And basically, it was an annual guidebook for African-American road trippers, which told them places where they would be welcome along the road, hotels, restaurants, that kind of thing, where they would be able to find accommodations. The Green Book was created by Victor Hugo Green, and it was published from 1936 to 1966. And Idlewild appeared in the directory as early as 1938. And you can see here a listing of some of the different places that you could stay in Idlewild at the time, including the Oakmere, which we had already talked about. And we're going to talk about Phil Giles as well. But I just love the names of some of these, the Casablanca Hotel, the Club El Morocco. They definitely have a very fun, exotic vibe. So the 1950s and 60s were also characterized at Idlewild by the nightlife. It was introduced by Arthur Edward Braggs and his Paradise Club at Idlewild. He, along with Phil Giles, turned Idlewild into the resort capital of the United States for African Americans. And both of them showcased stars like Della Reese, the Four Tops, Jackie Wilson, Aretha Franklin even came through. Basically all the top African-American performers of the day were performing jazz and these world-class showcases. They had fiesta dancers, they had music, costumes and dancing and all these big bands. It was, it just looks like a riot. It would have been so much fun. On these pictures here, we actually have Carlene Gill up here in her beautiful orange outfit. She was one of the Fiesta Dolls, which was one of the names for the dancers at the Paradise Club. And she danced from 1960 to 1964. This picture down here is actually the closing number for one of Arthur Bragg's Idlewild reviews at the Paradise Club in 1958. This is Clifford Fears on this side, and then the Fiesta Dolls and his band in the background. And the Idlewild Review not only did Arthur Bragg's company play at Idlewild, but then during the rest of the year, they traveled widely around the country and held these events at all the sort of major cities that they could get to. This one, for example, is in Cleveland, Ohio. And that was sort of the heyday of Idlewild. And I have about a short 2-minute video that I want to share that gives you a little bit more in-depth look at Idlewild. Specifically, it begins including, it has some video that I love. And I think I can get my screen share to do this. Now pause that for just a second to make sure that you can all see it before I move on. I'm juggling windows here, sorry about that. Okay. And here we go.
It's quiet today in this national forest east of Ludington. But decades ago, these woods echoed with music from the top African-American performers in the country, entertaining vacationers in Idlewild, Michigan. Idlewild was called the Black Eden. And for African-Americans, it really was a kind of paradise, where they could enjoy the great outdoors free of discrimination, threat, and exclusion.
Our parents, when they brought us to Idlewild, they knew we would be okay.
When you got up here and you met somebody, it was like family.
And you knew there was no door that would ever be closed to you here.
For African Americans in the early and mid 20th century, the Great American Road Trip was not so great. There was actually a guidebook that helped them find restaurants, gas stations, and hotels where they wouldn't be turned away. It was called the Negro Motorist's Green Book, named for former postal worker Victor Hugo Green, who published it from 1936 to 1966. Idlewild was founded in 1912 by 4 white couples who saw a business opportunity to cater to African American travelers. Vacationers could rub elbows with Black intellectuals, enjoy outdoor fun, and especially the nightclubs.
Do you know what Idlewild stands for? Idle men and wild women.
Ironically, it was the civil rights movement that brought an end to Idlewild's glory days.
Once it got where we could go other places, we wanted to experience that, so that's what we did, and Idlewild was just kind of left.
The clubs and other attractions closed, and the once booming resort was all but abandoned.
Yeah, I've lived other places, but Idlewild, this is my home. This is the only home I've had my entire life.
Today, a handful of residents remain, and there's renewed interest in preserving this critical part of Black history.
All right, we'll switch back over to my PowerPoint now. So I hope you all enjoyed that video. I loved it just for the black and white video of the time. It really gives you a sense of what Idlewild was, not just a resort, but a community, and a large community at that. And it's sad to see it in the sort of disrepair that it's in now. But it makes sense that suddenly, with the rest of the country open to them in 1964, that African Americans would begin to go and explore these avenues that were suddenly open to them for the first time. So that's most of what I have to say about Idlewild. So we'll be moving on to the second topic, but if you have any questions, again, please feel free to post them in the chat. And we will hopefully answer them right at the end or during the presentation. All right. So we are moving on a little bit later in time to the 1950s and 1960s. So again, to sort of set the scene, if you were in Idlewild, for example, in the 1950s, and you decided you wanted to come north to this idyllic place that we know as Petoskey and the Harbor Springs area. These were the good old days. You see these pictures of people out on beaches and going dancing and sailing. And of course, the resort communities here in Harbor Springs at that time were booming, and they had been for generations. But the hiccup was that most African Americans weren't welcome here. If you look at the Green Book showing Michigan from that time, you see that there's quite a few accommodations available, maybe in Detroit. And then, of course, here is Idlewild with all of its wonderful opportunities. But you turn the page, and the rest of Michigan is right there. That's it. There were no other places that were welcoming to African Americans in our area. And one of the big problems with that is that while our resorts were here booming, African Americans weren't allowed to participate, but they were certainly here. They came as the help. They came up with their employers who came for the summer as maids, chauffeurs, nannies, errand boys, and they didn't have an outlet of their own. So if you're in the 1950s and you're a maid, you get Thursdays and Sundays off. What are you going to do with those days if there's no place in Petoskey or Harbor Springs or the surrounding area where you're welcome? And that's where this gentleman comes in, Mr. William T. West. He knew about this sort of problem of accommodation and racism from personal experience. He was living at the time in Columbus, Ohio, but he worked on the Pennsylvania Railroad, which at that time was still running through northern Michigan. It was specifically the Northern Arrow for your air-conditioned comfort to the Northern Michigan vacation resorts that he worked on that train. And that train went from Cincinnati, Ohio, all the way to Mackinac City. And as an African American working intimately with the resort and tourist trade, William saw that there was no place for people like him to stay or eat or relax in town, regardless of whether they were vacationers just coming up for a weekend or whether they were employees who were permanent residents for the summer. And he decided to do something about that. He retired in 1949. And when he retired, what his family says, and I have to do a quick pause here and thank Rick Wiles, a historian in the area who did a lot of research on the Rainbow Inn and actually was able to interview some of the surviving grandchildren of Mr. West. And the story they tell is that the Northern Arrow, the train that we mentioned earlier, every time it came into Petoskey, it would drive past this old mansion up on the hill on Clarion Avenue in Petoskey. And the structure was originally owned by a local lumber baron. You can see his lumber yard right in front. It was called the Foreman and Curtis Mill. Later, of course, it would be known as Michigan Maple Block. And in this picture, it gives you sort of an idea of where it was located. So this is the lot where this mansion stood on the hill. And you can see the railroad tracks here going directly past it. This is Michigan Maple Block right up here. This is North Central Michigan College over there. And whenever he went past that house, he wondered about it and thought, that great old house would probably make a really good hotel. And there's a need in the area. I'm retired. Let's go for it. So he and his wife, Gail, decided to open the Rainbow Inn. So in 1950, they did some renovations to the building to turn it, at the time it had been partially converted into a boarding house. So they didn't have to do too much to turn it into a hotel, but they did turn it into both a hotel and a restaurant. and opened in the summer of 1950. Unfortunately, they had a little bit of a rough go of it at the beginning. You can see from these newspaper articles here that are both from 1950 that at first they petitioned to have a liquor license, and that petition to W.T. West on 1630 Clarion Avenue was denied. It was given to the Perry Hotel, and it was also given to a resort tavern by Norma Payne Price at 309 and a half Michigan Street. Now that's significant because Payne, the Payne location, this last name, was one of the few sort of bars where African Americans could also go. But it was literally like a back room over someone's house where you could go and get a drink and a bite to eat. So those two locations got liquor licenses, but the new Rainbow Inn was denied. That didn't stop them from serving alcohol to customers. And also, unfortunately, in 1950, the Rainbow Inn was raided by police and was fined $100 for selling liquor without a license. It says that they confiscated 9 cases of beer and 5 quarts of liquor. And this newspaper article is really telling for me. It mentions Mrs. West, Gail, not her husband, had operated the place, which was known as the Old Schmidt Home, as an eating establishment since she purchased it early this spring. It was largely patronized by Negroes. 57 persons were in the house when police raided it on Saturday. Despite this sort of rough beginning, the inn really did begin to flourish. They had special events on weekends. You can see in this picture on Sunday and Monday they have chili. There was a barbecue special that day. And this is actually a picture here. This is Gail West. And this is Gail West again with a couple of their servers at the Rainbow Inn. And these are pictures of what the Rainbow Inn looked like. I think this area here was where the restaurant was. And the story that the family tells is that the Rainbow Inn was named that because all colors were welcome there. You would often see Native Americans in the area as well, because Clarion Avenue in Petoskey is right off Sheridan and right near an area that was known as Hungry Hollow, where a lot of Native Americans rented or owned property. So it was sort of on the outskirts of town. And the Rainbow Inn was really the only sort of safe haven for travelers or residents from 1950 until 1965, when unfortunately the inn burned down. So during that fire, the fire chief said that the cause of the fire was unknown, but Mr. West, William West, had been in the building early in the morning. He had started a fire to warm up the building, left to put on his overshoes, and when he returned, he saw smoke and flames. And actually, a volunteer fireman named Norman Schmalzeride had a heart attack on the way to attempting to help this fire, and passed away as well. So it was a tragic night, and unfortunately, the Rainbow Inn was never reconstructed. So this is what the site of the Rainbow Inn looks like today. The property was sold recently, but it is just a barren, an empty lot. And there's nothing there to sort of hint at the history that this location had. Sadly, William West passed away in 1970. He's buried in Greenwood Cemetery in Petoskey. You can see here in his obituary, it mentions his time on the Pennsylvania Railroad and that he owned and operated the Rainbow Inn. I did want to again say just thank you to Rick Wiles for some of these pictures and the interviews that he had conducted. And with that, I'm done. that was just a sort of brief overview of both of these locations, which are so important, not just to local history, but to history of Michigan and African American history as well. And I am happy to take questions if there are any, or to sort of elaborate on anything if you are interested in it. And while that happens, I'm going to just have this slide sitting there so you can conveniently see when all of our next presentations are going to be. And if you go to our website at harborspringshistory.org, you can register for any one of these talks.
Thank you, Beth. We had one question with regard to, I believe this was speaking about Idlewild. You had mentioned what the site looks of the Rainbow Inn today. What is the property where Idlewild once was look like today?
That is a great question. It is also largely empty. Some of the buildings still remain. They have historical markers in front of them, specifically the Flamingo Club and the Idlewild Clubhouse. There is a museum and cultural center as well that is working to preserve that history, but I don't believe very many of the structures are still standing. And I know that there is a revitalization effort underway in the Idlewild community to try to bring residents and other people back. So it's sort of a little bit of a ramshackle town right now, but really trying to make a comeback. I know that they've started hosting music festivals around the 4th of July. And if you go to the Idlewild community website, just, their village website, you can learn more about those efforts.
Is the land still privately owned? Do you know if the state of Michigan is doing anything?
I believe most of the land is still privately owned. I don't believe, I think the lake itself, Idlewild Lake, might be state property. It might be like a state recreation area, but I'm not sure. And I don't know if the state of Michigan has partnered with anyone particularly to, try to revitalize the town.
Observation. We have two other questions. One is regarding a question about a place across from the Ponytail located on the grounds of Harbor Springs Airport. Let me see if I can.
I'm not sure.
I am going to unmute Kay Adeline and ask her to join us with that question.
Okay.
We can hear you.
You can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. There was said that there was like a path from the Ponytail all the way under the ground over to the Harbor Springs Airport. But in that area, and it very well may have been more close to maybe Ramona Park, but there was a building where the Negro could go to and have their small dances or get-togethers whenever they had their days off. And I wondered if she had heard anything about that.
I haven't particularly. I have heard some mention of, Club Ponytail was such a popular place. And in the 1960s, when it was getting started, they had a lot of big bands and big names come through. And some of them were, of course, African American. We actually have a poster in our collection of Dee Dee Sharp coming to the Club Ponytail. And she was, of course, an African American. And I've heard that there were places nearby that they could go. I think it was less of an established hotel and more of a person's individual residence where you could rent a room, that kind of a thing. But unfortunately, I'm not sure. That would be definitely something to investigate.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
And we have another question, Beth, from Mary Ellen.
Mm-hmm.
And Mary Ellen, we can hear you.
Okay. I just wanted, maybe everybody already knows, but the book by Alice Randall, The Black Bottom Saints, that goes through a lot of the artistic community that was associated with Black Bottom, the area in Detroit. And that frequently talks about various artists and musicians and dancers going out to Idlewild. And it's a great read. And so I just wanted to pass along the recommendation. The book group Bridge recently had, as part of its program, selected Black Bottom Saints and had an interview with the author Alice Randall. So it's a great read, and it's for people looking for more connections with Idlewild and the area Black Bottom in Detroit. I've passed that along as a recommendation.
Well, thank you. That's wonderful. And there were a couple other books that I came across about Idlewild specifically. You know, it's a 300-page book that goes deep into depth of who all owned cottages and where they came from and what music groups came. And I encourage anyone who's even remotely interested to read those. There's one called Black Eden, and there's another one that is just called Idlewild. And those are definitely good resources. And this Black Bottom Saints book you mentioned sounds interesting as well. And there were definitely groups who were sort of making the circuit from Detroit to Idlewild, and then also from Chicago as well.
And Beth, we have Katie joining us. Katie, would you like to share your information?
Well, I'm here with a resident who wanted to share what an experience that she had. So her name's Dodo, unfortunately. At an antique store, I bought a sign. It was in the shape of an arrow, and it said Booth, pointed to a place called Booth. I bought it only because my maiden name is Booth. I was told it was a restaurant for the folks who worked at Harbor Point, the Black folks, colored folks that worked at Harbor Point. Is that true?
Well, I have heard of Booths. Literally the only thing I've heard about it was the name. I didn't realize that it was potentially a restaurant catering to some of the domestic help that came to the resorts. But that could be another presentation. That's something I'll have to investigate. I think we actually have a similar sign in our collection for Booths. So maybe stay tuned. I'll see what I can dig up.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Those are all the questions that we've had, Beth. My name is Kristen Baylog. I'm the Executive Director of the Historical Society. I forgot to introduce myself in the beginning. Beth has been a seasoned veteran of hosting our virtual history talks here. So this was my premier event. So thank you, Beth, for all the research that you have done to bring this to the forefront. We also have another new premiering program called the History of Harbor Springs that we will be joining with NCMC, the college here, in their lifelong learning program. And we have another history talk coming March 11th regarding the historic gardens of Michilimackinac. In April, we will be featuring the first shipwreck of the Upper Great Lakes, and we have a guest speaker joining us. So that information can be seen at our website, harborspringshistory.org, or please always feel free to call us at 231-526-9771 or email us with any questions that you have. We are doing critical work here at the Historical Society. We are stewards of your history, and if we're not doing it, we're not sure who is. So share any and all of your history with us and any ideas that you might have for a discussion later down the line. Beth, I'll let you close.
That was a wonderful closing. I just wanted to say thank you all so much for attending this presentation. It was fairly brief, but I hope you got enough to sort of pique your interest and maybe get you sort of reading and thinking about these things on your own. There are a lot of great books out there. I will mention that the talks we have coming up for North Central Michigan College that we're doing a presentation for, I'll be doing that presentation just on the general history of Harbor Springs, focusing mostly on the early history. You do need to register for that. It's free, but you need to register at NUCBUC's website. And then the two presentations, March 11th and April 15th, that we are hosting, you also need to register for, and you can register on our website. But if you have any trouble at all, just call us and we'll be happy to register for you and help you out with that process. So hopefully we'll see many of you at many more of our talks. If you have suggestions for speakers or topics, please feel free to send them along as well, because we're always looking for that. So with that, I think we will let you all go, but thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you all.